A few weeks ago, I shared a little bit about the stress response cycle and how important it is to complete those cycles, and I said we would have another episode about that in the future, and welcome to the future, friends, because this is that episode. Stay tuned. I hope you enjoy this one. I think it's going to be really helpful.
You're listening to the Wellness Simplified podcast. Simple wellness tips to help you improve your life without turning it upside down. With your host, award-winning fitness instructor, nutrition coach, and wellness expert, Susie Fevens.
Welcome back to the podcast. A few weeks back, I talked briefly about the stress cycle and said that we would have another podcast episode talking more about that. And welcome, friends, because here it is. The stress cycle. Okay, so if we think about a time in our lives when maybe we get an email that stressed us out, that we had to go talk to our boss, and immediately we assumed that gloom and doom, maybe we're getting fired, we're getting reprimanded, something terrible is happening, and inside of our heads, inside of our bodies, the stress response has been triggered. Cortisol is flowing, heart rate's increasing, blood pressure is going up, maybe we feel queasy, all of the things. Then you go for your meeting with the boss, and it turns out they just wanted to give you a new key to the door, but they needed you to sign for it because they're those keys that are stamped and they can't be replicated, so they need to have a record of who has which key. And that was the whole thing. And then you're just like, oh, that was no big deal. And then you put your key on your keychain and you go back to work. So that email triggered the stress response. You now logically know that there is no fear. There is nothing that you have to be concerned about because you were just getting a new key. But your body, it doesn't know. It didn't get the memo that you were just getting a new key. So your body is still experiencing the stress cycle because it didn't complete. It didn't come to completion in a way that it recognizes. So that cycle is just unfinished. And what I like to think about unfinished stress cycles, I like to think of them as like browser tabs. Every time you start a new stress cycle, a new tab opens in your internet browser. And then because you didn't complete it, it stays open. And then the next time, another one opens, and another one opens, and another one opens. And because we're not completing those stress cycles, gosh, we could have hundreds of tabs open on our internet browser at any given time. And after a while, that is going to be really problematic. Like your computer's going to start shutting down. You're not going to be able to do anything. It's not going to have the right memory. The RAM's going to be all messed up. It's going to be just a disaster. And you're going to have to start closing those tabs. But as you go back to each of those tabs, if we think about it as an actual browser, you realize, oh, I have to do something on every single one of these in order for them to be able to close. And that can get a little overwhelming. So sometimes what we do is we just close down the browser and we pretend that that's not happening. That's not an issue we have. And we go on with our day. Except inevitably we had to come back to that browser and those tabs are still open. Things are still not working right. But we don't want to deal with all of those things. The same sort of thing happens in our body. So we start a stress cycle, we don't complete it, that tab stays open. Then the next time something happens, another tab, and another tab, and another tab. And then when we do engage in things that help us complete stress cycles, because we're going to talk about that as well in a minute, maybe we close a couple of those tabs, but there's no one thing that you can do that's going to close all the tabs. There's no force quit with incomplete stress cycles. There's no forced quit. You can't just shut the whole thing down and start fresh. You actually have to work through them, closing them down, finishing them out one by one. And yeah, sometimes these activities might close down a couple at a time, but it's never going to hit all of them. So it can be frustrating if you're someone who is dealing with burnout, who is dealing with issues with their nervous system, anxiety, all sorts of things, because you're doing all the right things, but you're still experiencing the symptoms. You're not cured, quote unquote. Even though you've closed a whole bunch of those tabs, you've completed a whole bunch of those stress cycles, there's still a bunch left. And you have to keep plugging away at them. And that's hard. It's hard. And you don't want to do it. So maybe you chip away at it for a while, and then it gets too much, and you walk away, and that's okay. But know that you're always going to have to come back. They're still going to be sitting there. You have to keep coming back and chipping away a little at a time, maybe just one browser tab at a time before you can get them all closed and start fresh. That same thing happens in our bodies. So how do we close the cycle? Fortunately, it can be easier than you think. But because most of us have so many of them open, it's still going to take some time. It's not a quick fix. Breath is a really great one for helping to close the stress cycle or complete the stress cycle. So in that example earlier, if after getting your new key from your boss, you went back to your desk and you took 30 seconds to focus on deep breathing, that would be able to complete that stress cycle, and then you'd be able to go on with your day. But a lot of times we don't do that. We just go on with our day, and we don't take that time to complete the stress cycle. It's important to note that breathing is only really going to help when your stress levels aren't high. So your stress levels might have been high when you first got that email from your boss, but then when you realize that you were just getting a key, like that's no big deal. You don't need a whole lot of time to recover. Immediately you felt better because you knew that you weren't getting fired, but your body didn't know the difference. But because you've now taken the time to do those deep aerobic expanding breaths, it signals to your brain that you are safe. There is not actually a lion chasing you. You are okay, and it will complete the cycle. But that's not always going to be the case. So breathing works, but on those lower stress items. Having time with friends, which if you're in lockdown can be a little bit more challenging, but having a get together with friends, whether it's in person or on Zoom or wherever, can do a lot for your mental health, and it can actually help to close some of those stress cycles as well. If you've ever felt really stressed out and just run down, and then you had a night out with some of your friends, and then you felt so much better afterwards, guess what? You closed out a bunch of those browser tabs. Heck yeah. And on top of which, laughter is another great way to close the stress cycle, because guess what? If you're running from your life, for your life, not from your life, well, that's a stress cycle on its own if you're running from your life. But if you're running for your life, you're not going to stop to laugh. So when you laugh in a real deep belly laugh, your body knows that you're safe, and it helps to close out those stress cycles. Love and affection, same thing. You're not going to stop and have like a big romantic hug or kiss if you are running for your life. So embraces, especially if it's 6 seconds or longer, can help to close out stress cycles. And guess what else can help? A big old-fashioned cry. So if you just find yourself bawling for no reason, watching a sad movie that makes you cry, listening to a sad song, or you just find yourself crying, that's just your body completing stress cycles. It's good. It's good. A lot of times we feel better after a big cry fest, and that's because we've closed out a bunch of those cycles, and boom, you're taken care of. And of course, we can't forget exercise. Exercise is a great way to close stress cycles. And I'm going to use another analogy here. I may have used this on the podcast before. I've used it in classes before anyway. So if we think about a lion and an antelope, and the lion sees the antelope, and it starts to go after it. It gets it, it captures it. And the antelope, in its nervous system, it has its fight, flight, or freeze. So fight is it trying to fight back against the lion. Flight, trying to run away from the lion, or freeze. And freeze happens when your brain has assessed that you're not going to win the fight, you're not going to be able to get away fast enough. So our best chance is just to pretend we're dead. And that's when you freeze. And that's what an antelope sometimes will do, is it'll get caught and it will just go limp. And so maybe in this example, the lion, realizing that it's quote unquote killed the antelope, goes to get its mate or some babies or something like that to enjoy the fruits of its labor. And as it leaves, a few minutes later, the antelope wakes up or it comes back to consciousness, and it will shake all over. That is the antelope shaking out the stress cycle. That's it completing the stress cycle. And then it'll get up and it'll run away. If you've been into my trauma-informed yoga classes, you've probably been exposed to the psoas shake, which is a tension release that is similar to what that antelope would do when it shakes all over, because it helps to complete the stress cycle. So anytime we practice the psoas shake, that's what we're doing, is we're completing stress cycles. And sometimes when we do it, it is coupled with crying or laughing or whatever other emotion might bubble up, because we're tapping into all of those stress cycles that are not being completed, and we're starting to close them. And how you react when you do the psoas shake really can change from time to time, because you never know what you're going to encounter in those tabs, right? You never know what kind of stress circuit you are closing up. So it can be different every time. But the nice thing is, it doesn't require you talking it out. You may never know what that stress cycle you were completing was, but you're getting the tension out of your body. You're closing out those tabs so that you can feel better. So some of the issues, as I touched on a little bit earlier, is most of us have a whole life's worth of incomplete stress responses that we need to work through. So while it can feel like you're never making any progress, you are. And this is where I come in with another one of my analogies. So I've talked about a lot the fact that I was burnt out for many years, and I am still in the process of recovering from that. And even though my burnout was more physical in nature because I was doing too much exercise through my teaching, I still have a lot of incomplete stress response cycles that I need to work through. And part of what's going on with me is my body's had to slow me down. I was obviously not getting the hint that I needed to stop. And so it stopped me. I gained a bunch of weight. I never really changed my eating habits much at all, but my body had to do something to slow me down. And now that I have slowed down and I've put up more, boundaries, that's what I'm looking for, boundaries about when I do and do not work and what I will and will not take on. And I'm trying really hard to maintain those boundaries. I'm also having to work through all of those incompleted stress cycles, working through closing down those tabs. And yeah, it can be annoying that as a fitness professional, I have gained weight, not because I've been face first in a bucket of queso. I don't think I've ever eaten queso actually, but because of the stress response. So I have this analogy, and it's kind of like you're cleaning out your closet, and you get to a point where you've taken all the stuff out of your closet and everything is a mess, and you're like, oh, why did I ever start this? This is a disaster. And you have two options. You can either cram everything back in your closet and say, I'm going to deal with this another day. Or you can stay with it, go through it, take the time to get through it, put the things that you're going to keep back, organize everything so that your closet is perfect and it's the way you want it and it's functioning wonderfully. But nobody really likes that middle point when everything is a mess. And sometimes we choose to just pick everything up and just shove it back in and say, you know what, we're going to deal with this later. I'm in that middle point. I've taken all of my stuff out of the closet. Things are looking a bit messy. I have the choice. I could go on a super strict calorie restricted diet and lose a bunch of weight. I could. I know how. I have the education. I have the capabilities. I know how to do it. But that's not going to solve anything. The next time I go to open up that closet, it's all still going to be a mess because I just shoved everything back in. Instead, if I stick with it, if I choose to recognize that by going through everything slowly, closing out those tabs one at a time, purging those things from my closet that I no longer need but are still there because I never really went through them, eventually I'll get to the end of those clothes or the end of the tabs in the browser and everything will have equaled out. I have complete faith that as I work through these incompleted stress response cycles in my body, with this extra weight I've put on will naturally fall off because my body will realize it doesn't need it. But it takes a lot of faith to know that or to do that. Because it's so tempting when you put your raincoat on and your raincoat doesn't zip and you don't want to buy a new raincoat. It's so tempting just to do something drastic that you know rationally isn't going to last long, but will make you feel better in the moment. Just like shoving everything in the closet and closing the doors will make you feel better in the moment because you've contained that mess. Allowing yourself to sit with that mess and go through it, even though it's inconvenient, even though it maybe makes you uncomfortable, that's going to get you there. That's going to get you there. And that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm working through. Is closing these stress response cycles through laughter, through connection, through movement, not through teaching fitness classes, but through walks and things of that nature. Closing the stress response and all of these, my browser would be such a mess. If I could visually see it, it would be such a mess how many tabs are open. But I got to work through it. Listen, it took me 12, 13 years to get to this point, plus any other things that happened in my life that caused a stress response that was not completed. I can't expect it to be resolved in a matter of months. It's going to take a while. So I share that in case it can resonate with you too, because a lot of us are in a place where we have unresolved stress response, and maybe some of that is showing in our physical self. Quick fixes are just that. They fix you quick, but only for a quick period of time. I know it's uncomfortable to have to go through the things and do the things to get the results you want longer down the road, but just like a really good closet purge, it's going to be worth it in the end, so stay strong. Work on closing those stress response cycles and realize that when you have a stressful day, try to close out that tab in that day when you can so that you're not adding more to the pile. Laughter, movement, connection, affection, these are all ways, breath, that you can do that. One of my favorite ones is a big sigh. And I think my husband thinks that I'm sighing in irritation, but a lot of times it's just oh, I can relax now, and I just have this big sigh. It's kind of like Rose, the cat. We always say that she powers down, at night when she curls up to go to sleep. She'll just be there, and then out of the blue she'll just go, and it sounds like someone's powered her down. She's completing her stress cycle. Oh, and another one for me, I think a big one for me in completing stress cycles is a bath. A bath really, because I do it every night, very often. There's 90% of the time I have a bath at night, and I think that completes my stress cycle because that signals to my brain that we're chilling out. Everything's okay. We're safe. Having a bath. Let's add that to the list. So I hope you enjoyed this little rundown of the stress response cycle and kind of how it acts in your body. I don't want you to freak out thinking about how many browser tabs you have open. Just join me in our mental closet clear out. We're going to get through these. We're going to be better on the other side, but we're sort of in the messy part, and it takes a little bit of time to get through it. So forget about quick fixes. Just stay true to completing those stress cycles, doing the things you know will benefit you in the long run, and will all work out in the end. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you've enjoyed this. I almost said recipe, this episode. Hit me up on Instagram if you found that it resonated with you at all. I am at Susie Confesses, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.